So today I'm going to show you how I made this Chicago Cubs sign out of epoxy, MDF, LED lights, and a little paint. I'll start off with a 3/4 inch piece of MDF on the CNC. Using a 1/4 inch upcut bit, I'll make a pocket that is a 1/2 inch deep. I'll then follow up with an 1/8 inch bit, which is the radius that I made any sharp corners in the design to. This will give me a better tape line later on in the project. After that, I'll use Kill spray paint to help seal the MDF from the epoxy. If you have ever worked with MDF, you'll know that it is not the easiest material to finish, but I found that by using Kill's paint, it makes a world of difference and seals the MDF far better than other paints that I have tried. After the paint dries, I'll put a ring of caulking around the carve to prevent any epoxy from overflowing and causing a mess. I don't think it matters on the kind of caulking you use. I used this one because it was paint ready within 30 minutes. Then using Total Boat thick-set epoxy, I'll mix equal parts of part A and part B using a hot water bath to help eliminate bubbles. Then it's just a matter of making sure you properly mix the epoxy while periodically scraping the sides and bottoms of the container. Keep mixing until the epoxy turns clear again. You'll know you're done when you can't see any more streaks. This is the white that I use. I get it off of Amazon. This brand only takes a little bit to work. I, however, went a little bit overboard with it, but I wanted a really thick white to help diffuse the LED lights. I just made sure to mix it into the epoxy thoroughly before pouring. All in all, I think it turned out perfect. Once I make sure my piece is on a level surface, I slowly pour the epoxy. Immediately after that, I use a torch to go over it. This helps to pop the bubbles. Then I spray the whole thing down with 91% alcohol. This also helps with releasing the air bubbles in the epoxy. 24 hours later, the epoxy is hard enough for me to begin to carve the colors. I'll use the same 1/4 and 1/8 inch upcut bits, but this time I'll set my depth for 0.2 inches thickness. This will give me roughly 0.3 inches of white between the colors and LEDs. This should be enough to diffuse the LED lights. Here I am adding another line of caulking to keep the red and blue epoxy from mixing with each other. I normally do one color at a time, but this was a nice workaround that saved me 24 hours of additional curing time. To make the colors, I used Total Boat's tabletop epoxy. I found that this epoxy works for pours up to 0.3 inches thick. Same as before, I use a hot water bath while mixing, making sure to constantly scrape the sides and bottom of the container. Once thoroughly mixed, I begin to add the color. For both the blue and red, I first started with a drop of white, then slowly added my colors until I got the desired effect. The blue turned out perfect the first time, but the red was a complete disaster. I had accidentally grabbed the wrong red and had to remix it, which I completely forgot to record, but I did record the pours. Despite my efforts, while pouring the blue epoxy, my daughter accidentally dripped some into the red cavity, which ended up being no big deal. It was a small amount and was easily wiped up. When dealing with epoxy spills and cleanup, just remember that 91% alcohol is your friend. Out of everything that I have tried, it cleans up epoxy the best. After pouring both colors, I again used the torch, followed by the 91% alcohol spray, for what I like to call bubble maintenance. 24 hours later, the epoxy is again hard enough for the final day of CNC work. Start off with a 1 1/4 inch flattening bit to flatten the epoxy. I tried doing this in one pass at 0.01 inch depth. In order to get a good cut, I found that lowering the feed rate to around 70 inches a minute while having a high spindle speed gives me the best result. If I run my feed any higher, I end up with a lot of little divots in the epoxy, which can become problematic, but they can also be covered with the clear coat. So if you do run into this problem, it's not the end of the world. Just make sure you clean them all out before you pour your clear coat, and if done properly, they should go away. After flattening, I go over the whole sign with an orbital sander and 120 grit sandpaper. I'm just trying to make the surface as smooth as I can before taping. Once I am satisfied, I'll use an air compressor and a damp rag to remove any dust, making sure I have it as clean as possible before I move on. Once the sign is clean and dry, I'll put a layer of Aura mask over it, making sure to completely cover all the epoxy. Then using a 1/16 inch corncob bit, I'll make a profile toolpath to cut outside any epoxy in the design. I then set my Z depth to 0, and using my hands, I set the Z0 to what I call a hard 0, just enough to scratch the MDF. If you get a deeper line than expected, don't worry, the clear coat should make it go away. After running that toolpath, I'll remove the excess tape. And the next step, I'll use a 1/8 inch compression bit to make holes for my pegs. The pegs are used to reference the position in the piece once I flip it over. I'll then use the same bit to carve the same holes, but on opposite sides of the wasteboard. I use my Home Depot pencils as pegs because I always have plenty of them on hand and it's convenient. I'll then place my pencil pegs into the holes I made on the spoil board, flip my project, line up the holes, and screw it down. Now I just use the same XY0 as before and start carving the back. Start off with a 1 1/4 inch flattening bit, making sure the blades are sharp and the cutting depth is around 0.07 inches per pass or below. I'll then cut a pocket that is 0.3 inches deep and that is also offset from the epoxy by 1/2 inch. When done, I should clearly see the Chicago Cubs design in white but backwards. Then I'll flip the piece back over to cut the profile toolpath with a 1/4 inch upcut bit. After that, I'll use a 1/4 inch roundover bit to give the profile a nice roundover. One thing that I forgot to mention before is that at the beginning of the project, I screwed the Cubs logo to another piece of MDF that was the same size. I do this to help prevent warping while the epoxy cures, and I also use this piece for the riser. While cutting my profile out for the Cubs logo, it scored this piece, but this is what normally happens, and it's no big deal. I just rerun the peg toolpath from the top piece so that I could flip the riser over and get a perfect cutout. While carving these pegs out, I also put 3 holes in the riser and in the back of the Cubs sign that correspond with each other. That way when I glue the pieces together, I can use these holes for pegs and have a perfect alignment. After flipping the riser piece back over, I'll use a 1/4 inch upcut bit to carve the riser. I designed this to be cut out in one toolpath. Now it's time to glue the riser to the main piece. First, I'll put the pegs in the back of the main piece, add a ring of Tip-On glue, spread the glue, and add the riser. Then it's just a matter of clamping the pieces together with as many clamps as you can fit or have lying around. While doing this, I try to wipe up as much glue squeeze out as possible. The next day, I remove the clamps and cut a piece of paper to fit the inside of the sign. I'll then tape this paper down so that I can protect the epoxy from the painting and finishing process. After that, I take the piece over to the router table and using a flush trim bit, I go over both sides of the project to ensure a perfect alignment around the edge. Then it's just a matter of going over the piece with some light sanding and checking that the tape is as good as you can get it before paint. Now it's time to paint. Using Kills spray paint, I'll prime the project starting with the back and then the front. After that dries, I'll sand the whole thing down with 320 grit sandpaper, making sure the project is smooth to the touch. Then I blow it off with an air compressor to remove any dust and begin painting the black. For this step, I'll use Rust-Oleum High Gloss Black. Same as before, I'll start on the back and when it dries, I flip the piece over and paint the front. I ended up doing 2 coats of paint on the front. Once the paint has dried, I make sure to only touch it with gloved hands. If you touch it with your bare hands, you can leave oil on it, which could mess up the clear coat. With gloves on, I use a knife to help peel the Aura mask, revealing the masterpiece underneath. Now it's time for my favorite part, the clear coat. I'll use Total Boat's tabletop epoxy for this part, and I mix it just like I mixed the other pours. Then I'll slowly pour the epoxy all over the project, making sure the edges get a nice layer. I used to use gloved hands to spread the epoxy, but found this unnecessary. If you use enough epoxy and have a level surface, gravity should do the rest of the work. Also like before, immediately after the pour, I go over the whole thing with a torch, but I do not use alcohol here. I found that on the clear coat, it does more harm than good and can end up leaving dimples. I also do this pour in a tent that I set up in my dining room in hopes of keeping as much hair and dust out of it while it hardens. I'll leave it in there for around 3 to 5 days so the epoxy can cure all the way. Once the epoxy is cured, it's time to remove the bubbles on the back of the piece that was created when I did the clear coat. The best method that I have found to remove these bubbles is by using a heat gun and a chisel. By carefully heating up the chisel and bubbles, it makes the epoxy easy to remove on the back. Then I take my disc sander with 120 grit sandpaper and completely sand the back ring down to the MDF. After that, I'll put a ring of tape around the edge to protect the epoxy and repaint the back. Once done, I can remove the tape and paper from inside the project. The last piece is the backer board. I get this material from Home Depot. It's 1/8 inch thick tempered hardboard, but I just call it backer board. I forgot to press the record button when cutting this piece out, but I did so with a 1/4 inch upcut bit. Then I took it to the laser engraver to engrave my logo. Then I cut a slot into it to fit the cords for the LED lights on the bandsaw. Once that is done, I cover the whole inner side of the backer board with aluminum tape. This helps as a heat sink, reflecting light, and with adhesion of the LED lights. I'll use a pencil to mark a line around the backer to show me where not to go with the LED lights. When applying the lights, I keep them plugged in so I can tell if I get a short or something while maneuvering them. Sure enough, halfway through my first set of lights, this is exactly what happened. No big deal, I just peeled them off and started with a new set of lights. I was able to fit close to 100 feet of LED lights into this sign. Now all that's left to do is put the backer board onto the sign, install a few screws, and a way to hang it. Finally, it's done. I think it turned out pretty good. Let me know in the comments what you think, and if you like what you see, please let me know by pressing the like and subscribe buttons.